Welcome to Creative Cloud for Web, Mobile, and Application Design. Just to set up the agenda, I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes about the overarching Creative Cloud vision for mobile and app development. And then we're very honored to have Nate Hoeller from Army MWR at Fort Gordon to talk about his success in using some of Adobe's tools for their mobile initiatives. And we're going to talk to Nate kind of informally Q&A for a few minutes and then open it up for questions towards the end. But let's just go ahead and talk about Adobe's overarching vision for the Creative Cloud. Our mantra for the last 30 years has been changing the world through digital experiences. But the team that I'm a part of at Adobe Systems Federal focuses specifically on how the military engages with ideas and information, and in a larger sense, the public sector. So there's a lot of initiatives going on around digital government these days with the Digital Government Act and all kinds of things that you see with agencies trying to simplify their processes and be more efficient and also be more mobile and maximize the engagement between constituents and agencies or interagency, wherever that device happens to be, wherever it's connected, and wherever it's located. Security is always a big issue, and safeguarding information that goes back and forth on those devices is always a key consideration. And then also making sure that the communications on those devices are optimized and fast and agile, and that whether we're working with private or public cloud services, that those are supported and secure. So the Adobe digital government overarching appeal, I would say, or the advantage of Adobe in the digital government stretches across what we call the 4 M's: make, manage, mobilize, and measure. And so there are tools across the spectrum of Adobe's product offerings that address each one of these pieces of your digital government life. But we're going to focus today on the web, mobile, and training, e-learning type of workflows where making and mobilizing content is basically a cyclical process where working on prototypes, doing designs, reviewing those designs, and then actually developing the applications, testing them, deploying them, and maintaining them forms this cycle inside of which many Adobe tools can come to bear. Before we get a little deeper in that, when I speak to my defense customers, it's usually useful to articulate which tools we're going to be talking about from a security perspective and delineating what is available in the Creative Cloud on the kind of an offline method versus a online services only method. So the tools that you see on the left-hand side, which were formerly part of the Creative Suite, are now part of the Creative Cloud, and they can be deployed on any government system, whether it's behind a secure firewall like Nipper or Sipper or the JWIX network, without requiring a tether out to the internet to get activation from Adobe. Additional tools, such as some of the edge tools and services that we're going to talk about a little bit later on, those are also available for offline deployment. And that's accomplished by taking these tools and packaging them with this packager utility and then deploying those packages securely behind your firewall. But the Creative Cloud is more than just the desktop applications. It's also a number of online-only services that require the end client who's using the services to be connected to the public internet. And so that's why we put them over on the right-hand side in red to delineate that many of the tools that we're going to cover today are offline deployable, but a few of them that we're just going to touch on do require online services, so it's a useful thing to know what the difference is. And if you are a part of the U.S. Army or in the Air Force or in DISA, then you may have already become aware of the joint enterprise license agreement that these three agencies executed in 2013 with Adobe for products like the Creative Cloud and Acrobat and the Adobe Experience Manager document services, also known as Lifecycle. And so this was a large enterprise licensing agreement that means if you're one of these agencies, you may be entitled to get those tools that we listed on the left-hand side that are offline deployable by contacting the IT division that you report into. You can also reach out to Adobe at adobegela@adobe.com to kind of figure out who the right contact would be to get in touch with at your agency. But one of the reasons that the DoD went through this joint enterprise agreement is because across the public sector, we've seen so much success with all of our tools, whether they're creative or document-based or document services. The Marine Corps and DISA, Army Corps of Engineers, and many other agencies with enterprise agreements traditionally see great efficiency and great security improvements in their internal processes. And one of the challenges I think we come across a lot in DoD is making the mobile web work. And we're all familiar with what we mean by the mobile web. We mean websites and applications that you get to on your handheld devices or on your tablets. So we've all encountered something that looks kind of like this in our day-to-day, right? You go to a website to get information while you're on the run, and the website doesn't work correctly on a small screen. You're either squinting or you're scrolling. Either the text is too big or more often it's too small. And it's even worse when it's your website that you're looking at and having these problems. But everybody's experiencing this across vertical markets and across government agencies. And in fact, there are websites that are dedicated just to calling out this type of phenomenon. There's a website called Techie, which is supposedly fresh and never boring, the hottest news on technology. But when you look at it on a phone, it goes to these skinny two columns, which are really awful. There's a user interface magazine called UX Mag, right? They call themselves the masters of user experience, but when you actually visit their site on a phone, it's pretty obvious that they're not really the masters. And this one from Universal Studios, these guys, they want you to know that you're holding your iPad wrong when you log into their website, right? If you want to see this, you have to hold the iPad the right way. And sometimes it actually winds up working the other way, where you start designing the website for mobile first, and then you forget about all the visitors that are coming from a desktop or a laptop. So we're all basically in the same boat. And we're pointing this out because these problems are, at this point in time, inevitable. And if you're not facing this problem right now in your agency, it's probably because you have a website that is one page long. So let's just go with a bit more of a concrete example of this problem, right? Here's a composition that we've done in Photoshop, and it's kind of the starting place for a large amount of web content. And what I mean by that is Photoshop is where many websites are born, kind of in this comping zone. So however you get that website onto a desktop browser, right, looks pretty good. But then once you look at that same website on a tablet, it's still decent, but I'd call it suboptimal in that the touch targets for the menu are definitely way too small. You've got 3 columns in your vertical layout, which makes the text too small. And then when you zoom in, you lose the context of what this design is trying to accomplish. So decent but suboptimal on tablet, but just awful on a phone. Right? When you're zoomed out, the touch points are way too small and you can't read anything. And then when you're zoomed in, all context is completely lost. So the question is, how do we get this fixed for our websites? And it really depends on who is on your team. With kind of the traditional print designers, which, there are a large number of them in any design shop. They're usually trained classically in design and layout, typography. They're very good at capturing emotions and messages and campaigns in traditional media, print media, and signage. And they find the web a frustrating place because on the web, the idea of pixel perfection or pixel precision is not really easy, and that's hard for them. These print designers will usually live and breathe in Photoshop, Illustrator, but mostly in the InDesign tool. And so Adobe Muse is a tool that was built from the same team that built Adobe InDesign. And it's a tool for visually laying out websites and web pages that uses tools and interfaces that InDesign experts can jump on very fast and be very productive with. It's a bit more of a focused tool than Dreamweaver in that you don't edit code with it. You visually lay out your pages and you manage your website's relationships. So here we see laying out interface elements with pixel-based placement. So the basis of the Muse tool is visual. And now we're just highlighting that Muse's controls match up with those of InDesign, right? It allows you to use a combination of web-safe fonts or machine-installed fonts or even Adobe Edge web fonts, which is one of those services that I referred to before. Now, those are completely free to use and unrestricted web fonts that allow a web designer to experiment with more than just Arial or Times New Roman, for example, on their websites. And so Muse allows designers to create layouts that work for a desktop and a laptop layout, for tablets, and also for phones and mobile devices. So a visitor would browse to the main website or URL on whatever type of device they're using, and Muse will ensure that they are getting directed to the right design and the right layout. And this is just an example, a couple different examples of websites very richly designed that were created with Adobe Muse. So switching gears, let's talk about a different type of team, digital designers, right? They're already pushing things out to the web, and they have their own workflows for getting content there, but it could be better. And for them, we have Adobe Edge Reflow. And Reflow is a responsive web design tool. It's intended to be used by designers to deal with the challenges of responsive web design. And when I say responsive web design, there's usually two things that people mean when they use that term. Number one is getting our site to work on mobile, which is a marketing term that's pretty fuzzy, not very precise. And the actual definition from Ethan Marcotte, who's kind of the grandfather of the responsive web design movement, is kind of a specific term that means using these three things to adapt to screen sizes, using a flexible design grid, using media that's also flexibly sized, and media queries. And we'll talk about those a little bit more. Now, before Edge Reflow, responsive web design usually meant creating multiple Photoshop comps for whichever media queries you wanted to target, right? Usually three: mobile, tablet, and desktop. So instead of creating three static Photoshop comps, with Reflow, you design one master composition that can display itself differently depending on the screen size. So for example, if you were to design this web page here in Adobe Photoshop, using Photoshop CC, you could come up in the File menu and say Generate Edge Reflow Project, and all of those image assets and the layout would be dumped into an Edge Reflow project. So once you're in Reflow, designers can basically make decisions as to how to display the content depending on the screen size that they're trying to address. And they can then pass these responsive comps over to web developers to implement them on the website. And speaking of developers, let's just talk about them quickly. Most designers depend on them to get the web content from the design phase to the production phase, but most web developers don't like tools to help produce their code. In fact, A little joke is, how do you know a developer hates some little bit of code? Easy, they didn't write it themselves. Most web developers like to write their own code, but they also need help in moving from the design phase over to the development phase, because capturing the intent of the designer and moving it over into code isn't always easy. And so we help at Adobe in several different ways, right? Dreamweaver CC has some new responsive tools that aid in developing and testing sites on a variety of different screen sizes, as you can see here. Edge Inspect allows you to preview your web designs on multiple devices simultaneously, so you can be sure that what you see is what you get. And then there's Edge Code, which is a lightweight, customizable HTML code editor built on the open source Brackets project. And Edge Code provides developers of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript with quick editing, code hinting, and an integrated visual design tooling to help get the development process underway without getting in your way. So we've gone from where we started having these broken mobile site experiences to, here now 2 devices getting an optimized experience, right? And we did that by using the right path for the right team. So again, for print designers, we offer Muse and the possibility of making great multiple sites, each targeting a different set of devices. For digital or graphic designers, we offer Edge Reflow and the ability to create compositions that scale no matter what size screens they run on. And for developers, we offer these tools that get out of the way and let them build web content the way they want while merely assisting. So whichever team you have, whatever choices you might make, Creative Cloud is a place where your team can get to where they want to be. And so just to quickly go over some great new resources for you, I want to encourage you to check out Adobe, our HTML page at html.adobe.com, where you can see all of these tools and learn about how Adobe is innovating in the web platform. A new project, a beta project called Project Parfait, where you can upload a PSD into the web browser and look at the CSS. Project Parfait breaks apart the Photoshop file and gives you CSS on each element in the Photoshop file and lets you copy it, lets you change it. It's a really great project. That's at projectparfait.adobe.com. There's also a great learning portal if you want to learn more about this content. There's a government blog, which we keep very well updated. There's this DoD webinar series, which is every Thursday at 2 p.m. And I just want to encourage you to download the resources on the left-hand side of your screen in today's slides. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to today's guest speaker, which is Mr. Nathan Hoeller from the marketing team at the U.S. Army's Morale, Welfare, and Recreation Activity, or MWR, at Fort Gordon. And Nate is a graphic designer with over a decade of experience in the field. And we invited Nate to speak today about the responsive web and mobile app initiatives that he's been working on at Fort Gordon with some help from Adobe's creative tools. So Nate, thanks so much for joining us today. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and the floor is all yours.
All right, thank you, Jerry. All right, let's see if we can get this thing up and running. Okay, everyone, you should be able to see my screen now, correct?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. My name is Nathan Hoeller, and today I'll be talking about how I built the Army Family Team Building app, or AFTV for short, using the open source Phonegap framework. Throughout this course, I'll be focusing on practical processes that can be used when developing an app. So let's get right into it. As I mentioned, I am Nathan Hoeller. I work as a graphic designer for Fort Gordon's Family and MWR marketing team. I've been in the graphic design field for almost 10 years now, but only developing since the last year or so. Since I'm still a self-proclaimed newbie developer, I would advise that you also consult with professional developers during any development process that you go through. One of the best sources for professional advice, in my opinion, is lynda.com. If you have a subscription, I highly recommend their courses on development. These courses were vital to my own understanding of app development and are sure to be a valuable asset for you. I've included a list of recommended courses in the helpfulresources.pdf file, which you can see on the side there. So I'd encourage you to download that. Okay, most of us, I would say, would fall into two camps. Either the right-brain visual people, which is the camp that I would fall into, or the left-brain logical people. It's rare to find somebody who falls into both camps, but if you know somebody who is, introduce them to app development. They'll probably feel right at home. But for the rest of us, there's this dichotomy, this contrast in our minds between the left and the right, the logical and the aesthetic. This is made painfully clear to anyone who, like me, moves from designing purely for print to venturing into the wilderness of developing code. I hope that by explaining the process of building the AFTV app from my right-brained perspective, I can help others out there who are in a similar position. As I mentioned, the AFTV app was developed using Phonegap. This is an easy alternative when compared to developing apps using native languages for each individual platform. As their homepage states, Phonegap lets you easily create apps using the web technologies that you know and love, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So if you're already a web designer who's familiar with these languages, then you're right on track. All right, so basically when you use Phonegap, you're creating an app that's compatible with multiple platforms all at once. And once the code is completed, you can go over to build.phonegap.com and let Adobe's Phonegap Build compile your app into the native code needed to run on each platform. Easy, right? Now that you know the approach that we're going to be taking, we are almost ready to start building this app. There are a few prerequisites we need to check off before we get started, though. First off, it's important to have a good understanding of responsive design. Responsive means that our web content automatically reflows itself to fit on various types of screens, like a desktop monitor, tablet, or a smartphone. Information automatically reflows itself into a format that viewers can easily read with minimal scrolling. I'll show you an example with our FortGordonFYI.com page here. This page was set up as a responsive design. And this goes right along with what Jerry was speaking about earlier about responsive design. So as you can see, this is a desktop format. We size down to a tablet format where the main bar basically is changed to a single icon. Then when it goes down to mobile, if you watch the sidebar there, as we size down, the sidebar actually jumps underneath the main content so that everything, no matter what size you view it at, all the fonts and everything are still readable. So it's important to understand that going forward. All of this is done by using media queries and style sheets for your web content. All right, now, I know what you may be thinking. What does this have to do with developing a phone app? This is supposed to be about developing the AFTV app. Well, remember that mobile devices are not created equally. If you're developing for mobile devices such as iPhones, iPads, as well as the many Android phones and tablets, you'll find a multitude of varying display sizes. This is why understanding responsive design is so important. Secondly, it helps to understand creating graphics that are Retina display compatible. You can tell that when viewing these two images side by side, that there's a big difference between the standard and the Retina image. You can use media queries here as well to detect screen resolution, providing specialized styles and images that will look great on a Retina device. For your reference, I've included some samples as well as some helpful links for these media queries in the helpfulresources.pdf file that's available on the side there. And finally, the last important prerequisite, I would say, is think automation. The more automated the content, the better. This is important to consider because static content can only be altered on an app by submitting an update, and some platforms can take over a week to approve your update before it's available to the public. Some examples of automation would be a social media feed or an event calendar from Google Calendar account. Basically anything that can provide fresh content without the need to resubmit the app. All right, now that we're thinking like developers, let's start building this app. The first step is the planning process. So to start, let's define the purpose of the app. The purpose of the AFTB app is to be a teaching tool that is a reflection of the Army Family Team Building classes that are offered to military family members. Next, let's plan out the features of the app. This will be important when we get to the development process. The AFTB classes are separated into 3 different levels: knowledge, growth, and leadership. Each level includes information, quizzes and assessments, and checklists. So all of these will need to be included. We also need some method of tracking the user's progress throughout the app. Okay, this will be a good place to determine whether a mobile app is really the best option, or if your app's purpose could be more effective as a mobile website. So what's the difference, you ask? An app is installed locally on a mobile device and doesn't require a browser. These are typically downloaded from app stores. A mobile website, on the other hand, is a website that must be viewed in a mobile browser and that is built for mobile devices, usually by using a responsive design. Okay, so let's look at a few pros and cons for the mobile phone. First pro, it will always be available locally on the user's phone, but keep in mind if some of your app's features depend on feeds from a network connection, these features will not be available. Another benefit of mobile apps, according to Nelson.com, mobile users are spending a significantly longer time using apps as opposed to mobile web, 89%. The disadvantage is the amount of time it takes to develop an app and maintain it, not to mention the fees that are involved in setting up developer accounts in order to submit your apps. Currently, the Apple fee is $99 annually. Google Play for Android is a one-time fee of $25, which isn't too bad. And Windows Phone is $99 annually as well. Once you pay these subscription fees, you can submit as many as you'd like. Now for a mobile website, many of the native features of an app are achievable on a mobile browser. This includes features like the accelerometer, geolocation, local storage, and more. Also, the mobile website is accessible to anyone with a network connection without the need to download the app. The disadvantage is that mobile users spend more time using apps. So even though all the functionality of a native app could be created as a mobile website, the fact that it's not the preference of the general user justifies the effectiveness of developing a mobile app. Okay, now that we're sure we're making the right choice in creating this mobile app, let's map it out. This is where we draw out a diagram of the individual pages or views and all of their connections. With the AFTB app, we're going to start with a splash screen and then the main page. This page is connected to 5 individual pages, one for each of the 3 levels of the course, as well as a point of contact list of all the AFTB locations and an about section. For each one of the levels, we have a list of lessons. You're taken to a list of individual pages for that lesson, which could be a variation of information pages, quizzes, assessments, and checklists. This map helps us see a full picture, which is very useful for the next step, which is the development process. We have our map drawn out, and we know what features we'd like to include. Now we're ready to start developing the code. First, let's set up the basic structure of our app. We're going to take advantage of Jquery Mobile's framework and their theme roller service to create some custom color themes for our app. Theme roller, in my opinion, is a right-brainer's best friend. It allows you to customize your themes and export them directly as a custom CSS file. For the AFTV app, we're going to start with a dark colored theme for the general content, like the POC list and the About page. We have a separate color set up for each one of our themes, each one of our lessons, sorry. And finally, a light colored theme that'll be used for the actual content in each lesson. Next, we'll lay out the code for our app pages, preparing the visual elements like photos and buttons along the way, and remembering to save Retina versions of each graphic. Unfortunately, I won't be able to go into great detail here as far as the code. So if you're not familiar with jQuery framework, I would definitely recommend checking out their documents page or checking out their demos page at demos.jquerymobile.com. This is the point where we take that list of features prepared in the planning process and develop solutions for each. As you may remember, the features were information pages, quizzes and assessments, checklists, and the progress tracker. You see the progress tracker right here within this tab. So I'd like to show you a demonstration of how the progress tracker actually works. Okay, so if we click on the first tab here, select a lesson and an individual page here. This is an example right here of an information page. So after they've read the information, they'll press the back button. And as you can see, it indicates that this page has been viewed. So they're able to track what pages have been viewed and which ones are remaining. Press the back button again, you can see that the overall total is calculated here for this lesson. And in the overall progress, you can see the overall progress of the entire app in this progress section here on top. Okay, and again, I won't be able to go into detail as far as the actual scripts that were written to achieve these features, but I will tell you that one of the biggest hurdles was setting up the quiz structure, which I'll show you an example of here in our first quiz. Okay, right here. For this, I depended largely on the knowledge of other developers. I found an open source framework called Slick Quiz on github.com. I was able to use this framework with a few modifications to fit the need of this app. GitHub is one of the suggested resources that I've added in the helpful resources.pdf file for your downloading pleasure. GitHub is a great source of support that I highly recommend. All right, in the development phase, you'll want to test your app and test it often to be sure that everything is functioning correctly. There are emulators for different types of devices available online, but nothing compares to testing on a real device. So if you have one handy, definitely run your app on that device. Although emulators are designed to be identical to the devices they emulate, they can sometimes differ in their performance when compared to the actual physical device. The most useful method I found for testing was using Adobe's Phonegap build. I'll need to be brief on the details to respect your time, but you can find exact instructions for preparing your code for upload to Phonegap build at docs.build.phonegap.com. At this point, if you haven't already done so, you'll need to purchase the developer account with Apple in order to test on an iOS device. Once you have set that up, you can generate the developer certificate and provisioning profile necessary for Phonegap build to generate your app. Windows and Android devices, however, will work with or without an account. Later down the road, when you're ready to generate the final app files, these accounts will be needed, but for the time being, only the Apple developer license is required for testing. You can find details for signing your apps at the docs.build.phonegap.com website. Once it's uploaded, you'll be able to scan this QR code generated by Phonegap build and download the app directly to your device. All right, we're getting close to the end now. Our app is developed and has been tested thoroughly. Now we're ready for the final step, the deployment process. If you haven't already done so, now is the time to get those developer accounts set up for each of the platforms you wish to target. We've decided to only target ISO and Android for now for the AFTV app, so we'll ignore Windows Phone for now. But should we ever decide to include them, the code is already available through Phonegap build. Keep in mind that when generating your final finished app, you'll need to create a distribution certificate for each targeted platform. The developer certificate that we've been using to generate our apps in Phonegap build for the iOS app will need to be changed to a distribution certificate. Likewise, the default Android debug certificate will need to be swapped for a distribution certificate. Instructions for creating these certificates as well as iOS provisioning profiles can get very technical, so I'll save you some of the technical jargon for now, but do be aware that this process will likely cause a few headaches. I've included some links in the helpful resources.pdf file that should help make this process a little easier. Next, you'll want to build your app in Phonegap build, then download the finished app files for each platform, and finally, submit the app to the App Store and Google Play Store. And we are finished. That completes this lesson in developing the AFTV app. I hope that you found some practical advice here that will help you move forward into the world of app development. Please be sure to download a copy of the helpful resources.pdf file if you haven't done so already. Also, if you'd like to download the app we just created, you can find the link for the iOS and Android at apps.fortgordon.com. And now I will pass it back to Jerry.
Awesome. Great job, Nate. Wow, thank you. That really was illuminating to me. I can't speak for anyone else on the line, but great stuff. And I definitely learned a lot. I'm going to reshare my screen again because we're just going to go through some questions and answers now. So let me know when you can see I've got a Q&A slide up here.
Yeah, I see it now.
All right, great. So the first question that I had for you, and I think probably the rest of our audience would want to know, now that presentation that you just created there, just the slide deck itself, so people didn't see it because you had it in full screen, but you were actually presenting that through a web browser, and I wanted to know how you built that presentation because it didn't look like PowerPoint. It looked a little different.
Yeah, it was a little different. Actually, I set that one up in InDesign Creative Cloud using the interactive animation option. And after I set it up, I exported it as a Flash Player file or a Swift file. I love setting up presentations in InDesign. I feel like it gives me a lot more control than a PowerPoint presentation.
Wow, nice. And so that's definitely a great option for creating presentations. I think setting up the templates and setting up the animations and the interactivity. But if you wanted to get that particular presentation out to a mobile device, how would you go about doing that? Would you put it out to a PDF, or just because the SWF Flash format isn't supported on most mobile devices at this point? So how would you go about getting it out?
I'd imagine something like that would need to be created using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You could create something like a slider that you'll see in a lot of websites. I would imagine something like that would probably work. Right.
So yeah, well, it occurred to me that when I first saw it, I thought maybe you had made it in Edge Animate, which is another one of the tools we didn't really talk about during my presentation, but it's part of the whole Creative Cloud family of tools.
Right.
Have you played around with that?
Very briefly, actually, and I saw, based on some of the screenshots from your presentation, I'm very excited to get into that, and I kind of wish I was more involved in it before I started learning the code. I feel like that was such a burden on my brain to try to wrap my head around all the text and everything. It really would have been nice to have a more visual way of laying out elements on the page.
Right. Well, now you can take it back and start checking it out. Edge Animate is one of those tools that as part of the Creative Cloud. It's included, and it can be deployed in an offline environment, and it's really useful and fun. I've seen a lot of really beautiful interactive animations and kind of the same stuff that you'd see coming out of a Flash file, but done all in HTML and visible on mobile devices as well. So just thought I'd see what the future brings for that. Now, one of the questions I had that came up was, you're a graphic designer and an artist, and I'm just curious what made you feel from a career perspective that you needed to start getting into web and app development. I mean, why not just stick to the right brain and let the coders and developers figure out this stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question, and honestly, now that I'm on the other side of it, I really think that there's a great advantage to being a designer and a developer. It helps you to understand the technology as a whole, and it allows me to visualize all of the options available for a project from start to finish. And another reason I decided to take on developing was to keep up with the trends in technology, basically. Today, interactivity and animation on the web are very popular and effective methods of advertising, sharing information, things like that. The graphic designers of today are no longer designing for just ink and paper.
Right, that is true. But you'll find generally within the designer camp, there are those who who will kind of make a conscious decision to stay in the to stay on the designer track. But it's kind of a rarer phenomenon I've found that folks are willing to venture in. But I'd say it's probably becoming also more of a requirement than a nice to have, in today's kind of job marketplace.
I agree. Yeah, definitely.
So you mentioned that mobile websites are generally less trafficked on phones and on tablets than mobile apps, right? And I think that's backed up by Nielsen and a lot of other, Gartner and Forrester. I think you'll find many statistical analyses saying get an app. The website is important, but I think mobile web are always positioned as slightly less desirable as an end medium than the app. But that being said, mobile optimizations are becoming more of a necessity for all websites. And so when do you see both as the right answer for a project?
That's kind of a tough question. Definitely, I would say mobile websites are a necessity. I believe that every website should be optimized for all devices, from desktop to mobile. And I don't believe that an app is a replacement for a mobile optimized website. So to answer your question, I believe having both a mobile website and a mobile app would be a good idea and would reach the widest audience. But personally, I would put a higher priority on the mobile website first.
Okay, and that Ford Gordon FYI site that you designed, I think that's probably a great kind of example in that getting to know what's going on around your particular base is something where folks are going to be hitting that website from wherever. They might not necessarily even conceive of getting that information from an app. So the website is kind of the first priority for something like that.
Right. I would say most folks they'll discover a company or they'll discover your website basically from a search on Google or something like that. So the first thing that they visit, you want it to look good. It may not be the app that they see first. That's why I think the website is far more important to get modified firstly.
Right. Great point. Yeah. Now you mentioned Jquery Mobile, which is actually a framework that Adobe contributes to regularly as part of a number of different standards bodies. And you also mentioned Theme Roller, which Adobe contributed to for styling the Jquery Mobile widgets. So are there any particular tools that you use that make working with Jquery Mobile easier for you?
I would say that Dreamweaver has been the most useful program for me. I use it to write all the code and edit it, and it makes it easy to access all the link style sheets and scripts. And honestly, I don't think I get very far without the code hints and code coloring. Also, I use the developer tools on Google Chrome, Firefox to track the different styles that are applied to objects on my code. This is a great way. It's a great way to test out those styles, to change them on the fly before making them permanent in the actual style sheet.
Nice. And for those who are planning on attending our Dreamweaver session coming up in a couple of weeks, we're going to dive into that, the Jquery Mobile features in Dreamweaver, because there are a number of them that are always being improved in Dreamweaver. As you can see, if you came in to make a new Dreamweaver site, a new HTML site, you'd be able to come into the insert and start putting in Jquery Mobile list views, layout grids, widgets, all kinds of stuff, and be able to style that with the new Css Designer Panel, which does a lot of the same types of tasks that Nate's talking about when it comes to tracking the styles that are applied to your objects and kind of test them out before committing them in the code. So just as a teaser for what's coming in the next DoD webinar, which is happening in a couple of Tuesdays, on a few Thursdays away from now. So you mentioned emulating with Phonegap build as a method of testing apps on real devices. And I'm curious if any of the other emulators like Edge Inspect or any of those types of tools have become part of the equation for the mobile web for you. And if not, are there any tips and tricks for, particularly for testing, that you can share?
Okay, that's actually one program that I haven't really delved into much, but I'm excited to start out in it. I saw, based on the screenshots you shared in your presentation, it looks very helpful and definitely something I want to look into more. I'd actually been working off of CS5 up until last January, so I'm a little behind the curve on some of the newer features in Creative Cloud.
Wow.
But as far as mobile testing tips, since the AFTV app was created using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, I was able to take advantage of the development tools within my browsers like Chrome and Firefox, and that was the quickest resource for me for testing. Whenever I'd introduce a new major function in the app, I would build the app in Phonegap build and run it on my phone just to be sure that everything was working correctly on the device.
Nice. Well, that was pretty much all the questions that I had. One of the things I wanted to kind of point out to the audience of folks who are on the line here, is that Nate mentioned that these apps are being uploaded to public app stores like iTunes and Google Play, and so in many cases in the DoD, you're going to be working with apps that might not get distributed publicly, that you might not be able to leverage, an Adobe service like Phonegap build in order to compile the app. But I did want to refer you to, a resource which is basically pretty easy. It's phonegap.com, right? Phonegap.com. And so what that is going to allow you to do is install the free and open source SDK. And that SDK will basically allow you to compile apps via the command line instead of uploading it to an Adobe service, right? What Nate and his team are doing are packaging the mobile apps in Adobe's cloud, which means that the data actually has to get compiled and packaged on Adobe's service and then sent back down to the mobile devices. And the advantage that provides is that Nate doesn't have to have this SDK installed. He doesn't have to have the Apple SDK or the Android SDK, any of these other mobile device SDKs installed on his local system, and open up the native tooling and the command line to compile using the SDK, because it's a fairly technical process, as he said. But if you cannot access Phonegap Build, the service, then you can get the SDK from phonegap.com, wrap it up, and with the native SDKs, you can deploy those apps in a similar fashion. So that's pretty much all I think we had. I was going to stop sharing my screen now and go over and take a look at some of the questions that we've been getting in from the chat pod. And if you have questions, feel free to type them in. Now, I've been clearing out the chat pod a little bit, Nate. So one of the questions that I got in was from Scott F., who, let's see, are you still online there, Scott? Yeah, you are. So, he was asking when you talked about the Retina display and making sure that you had graphics that were optimized for, Retina versus non-Retina devices. His question was, do you have to save two different files for lower res versus higher res, and what are the best practices around that?
Yes, you would have to have two separate files, and basically what the difference between a standard and a Retina, usually the standard graphic is saved at 72 DPI, and a Retina is twice that, which would be about 144 DPI. And there's usually the pattern that I follow is I'll normally name the file the same. So say, for instance, I have a home icon called home.jpg. I would say the Retina version is home2x or at2x.jpg. The naming the system really doesn't matter that much as long as you're aware of what you're doing, because what you'll do is then go into the CSS and create a media query for that Retina graphic. And if you look at the helpful resources.pdf file, I've got a sample of it in there. Basically, you will put the Retina image information within that media query, and it'll automatically apply when it notices that it's on a Retina device.
Cool. Well, Scott, I hope that was helpful in helping answer your question. And then we've got one in the chat pod right now from Tyler. He says, I too am a classic designer and find it difficult to make the full jump and integrate mobile and web into my toolkit. I can design, I can imagine and animate. Any suggestions to ease the transition or the approach?
Well, I mean, I can't say it was an easy road for me, but I can say definitely check out the options with Phonegap. That really helped me, because I started out trying to learn the native languages. I tried to learn Objective-C, which is the native language for Apple, and I think I kind of understood it, but it's so far beyond what I normally do as far as designing that I couldn't wrap my head around it. So definitely check out Phonegap. It was very helpful. Check out some of those resources I have in the PDF. There are tons of folks out there, developers out there that basically have code and information online, through forums and FAQs and stuff, where they've provided a lot of the information for you that'll help you get started. But I mean, I depend a lot on the online communities as far as getting information.
Yep, and lynda.com actually has some really great tutorials, like you were saying, on just understanding all the different necessities around designing for mobile. They're really great. I'm also a huge fan.
Cool.
So Scott says, fight to make your superiors put a Lynda account in the budget.
Definitely, yes.
Yep, I agree. I agree with that. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions coming in from the chat pod. And Scott's saying that he pays for it himself, which, that's you got to do what you got to do sometimes. And there's stuff on Linda, and Linda actually just acquired this other great company called Video 2 Brain, which are great. Okay. But anyway, there's also that learning portal that I mentioned when I was going through my slides that you can download the link to over there on the Adobe CC Mobile PDF over there on the left-hand side under today's slides. So if you get that, that has all of my slides from today, and also has links to the new learning portal on adobe.com, which, that's a little bit more structured than your typical Adobe TV in that it offers, beginners, intermediate, advanced, and kind of master types of classes. So with that, and I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat pod. I guess we'll give everyone a few more minutes back in their day. But I just want to say again, thanks so much to Nate for putting together such a great presentation and for helping your fellow DoD brethren and sistren